Right, so Keir Starmer has stood up in Parliament and offered his own response to Rishi Sunak's Iran-bashing, Israeli sympathising ministerial announcement that G7 countries are putting together a package of measures against Iran. And frankly, he might as well have let Sunak write it, since it in no small way showed that the Labour Party and the Tory Party are very much on the same side of the argument here, the wrong side. That Israel are the poor victims of a dreadful attack by Iran, and the British forces getting involved was the right thing to do. But not only did he do that, he also blatantly lied about what Iran actually did. It was so sycophantically pro-Israel and pro-Tory, not to mention such a load of gaslighting drivel, he might as well have let David Cameron write it, given the guff he said to Kay Burley on Sky the other day, which she had none of. There's no differentiating between the two main parties in their attitudes toward Iran, and their avowed support of the genocidal regime in Gaza. But this response from Starmer was depraved and dishonest beyond belief.
We support the defensive action taken by the UK over the weekend, alongside our international allies, against the Iranian attacks on Israel. And we welcome the Prime Minister's call for restraint. Once again, we all salute the professionalism and bravery of our armed forces. We also support the RAF planes being sent to the region to bolster Operation Shader. Their efforts are vital for a safer world. Mr. Speaker, there can be no doubt that the attack perpetrated by Iranian forces this weekend has left the world a more dangerous place. It targeted innocent civilians with a clear intent to destabilise the region. It must be wholly condemned by all. But, Mr. Speaker, let us also be clear. A full-scale conflict in the Middle East is in no one's interests. It is a path that can only lead to more bloodshed, more instability, and the unleashing of forces that are beyond the ability of anyone to control. Mr. Speaker, the combined defensive action this weekend was a success, and because of that, lives were saved. As a result, escalation is not inevitable. In repelling the attack, Israel showed strength and courage. It must now show the same strength and courage to de-escalate. That has to be the primary objective. And, Mr. Speaker, that is the responsibility of all sides and every partner. We must be resolute and united in our support for the collective security of Israel, Jordan, and other partners in the region. But tensions remain very high. We must proceed calmly, carefully, and with restraint. Because if diplomacy takes centre stage, and it must, then we also need to be clear: diplomatic premises should not be targeted and attacked. That is a point of principle. But as the condemnation from our G7 allies rightly notes, Iran's response this weekend was unprecedented, a further step towards the destabilisation of the region and the risk of escalation. And nobody in this House should be or is under any illusion. This is a regime that sponsors terror across the Middle East and beyond, that murders and represses its own people and supports Putin's war efforts in Ukraine. So can the Prime Minister update the House on any new steps he's taking with our international partners to pursue sanctions against the regime? And can he clarify what steps he's taking to limit the power of the Revolutionary Guard to glorify terrorism here in the UK? Mr. Speaker, whilst there is no justification for Iran's actions, we cannot be naive to the fact that one of the drivers of tension in the region is the ongoing war in Gaza. 6 months on from the horrific Hamas terror attack, hostages remain separated from their families. Thousands of innocent Palestinians have been killed. And now more than 1 million people face the imminent threat of famine. So I urge the government again to use every ounce of diplomatic leverage that we have to make sure aid to Gaza is unimpeded and drastically scaled up. Alongside that, we reiterate our call for for an immediate ceasefire, for Hamas to release hostages, and for a return to a diplomatic process that can rekindle the hope of a two-state solution. Mr. Speaker, it is right that we condemn Iran's action. It is right that we work with others to defend the security of our allies. And it is right that we seek the end of conflict in Gaza. But this is a moment for restraint, because escalation will only lead to further destruction, and for the sake of all those still caught in the horror and violence, that must be avoided.
Right, so that was Keir Starmer's response to Rishi Sunak's announcement to the House of Commons. Very much past the sick bucket levels of dishonesty, I felt. Escalatory in its language, certainly, and utterly misrepresentative of the facts. But we're becoming used to that from our politicians right now in this country, aren't we? Well, more so than we were previously, at any rate. He stood there and praised our armed forces for their involvement, shooting down drones and missiles as they passed through Iraqi and Syrian airspace on the way to Israel, painting a target on our backs now, potentially, and all the more so as we are apparently sending more RAF jets out there that he ridiculously thinks will make the world safer. Well, let us never forget how Iran came to make this attack to begin with. Israel deliberately targeting their consulate in Syria. That happened first. Israel made the unprovoked attack. The level and scale of Iran's defence, which is what arguments against Iran are trying to fixate on amongst our politicians as they seek to find some kind of an angle in order to defend the indefensible, to still slavishly support Israel, yet to listen to them, that incident either never happened or was such a minor thing as to not warrant what they deemed to be an over-the-top retaliation. Targeting a consulate is against international law. It is in breach of the Vienna Convention of 1961. It has also never happened before. It is a world first that a consulate be deliberately targeted and attacked. So this is no minor thing. It's a whole brand new level of low in the course of warfare. 13 people were killed. Iran, despite everything that has been said about their attack, there were no fatalities, and there's a reason for that, some of which I covered in a video yesterday detailing what I think was Iran's strategy here, that this amounted on their part to be basically a weapons test come intelligence gathering exercise. But with Starmer having stood up and blatantly lied by saying that Iran perpetrated an attack, it didn't. It responded to one, standing up and lying that Iran's targeted civilian centres with a clear intent to destabilise the region. Brings me on to the fact no civilian centres were targeted whatsoever, which is the other reason there were no fatalities. The only damage really that has been reported, and even the BBC are reporting this, is that the Nevatim air base sustained light damage when 5 ballistic missiles made it through to where Israel keep their F-35s. The damage sustained even then was only to an empty hangar and a runway. So again, I reiterate, Israel struck first, struck at Iran, struck its consulate. They are the ones destabilising the region, therefore. I really can't see how anyone who is paying attention to this ongoing story can see this as being anything other than a mess of Israel's instigation. Our politicians take us for fools, and when it comes to matters of war and defence, that puts us in danger. It does not make us safer. Israel showed strength and courage, Starmer went on to say. No, they didn't. They showed Iran their defensive capabilities, their own fault for attacking them to begin with, something I firmly believe Iran merely tested with their retaliation. What they have shown for 6 months now is genocidal mania. Starmer stood there and said how they saved lives. They took 7 lives a week ago, you foolish man, including 3 Britons. 33,000 Palestinians are dead at Israel's hands. That isn't courage, you idiot. That's genocide. How dare anyone speak of Israel's courage when everything that has happened in Gaza and beyond, in Lebanon, Syria, the Red Sea, now Iran, is on them? But no, Iran are the ones escalating matters. Iran are the ones launching unprecedented, unprovoked attacks. Apparently because for some reason they apparently don't have a right to defend themselves in the eyes of our politicians from attacks on their sovereign soil, which is how embassies are regarded around the world. They're treated, and attacking one of those, as I said a moment ago, that is what is actually unprecedented here. And it's not as if there are not faults with Iran that can genuinely be made. The way the country is run, how it often treats its own people, the poverty there, the theocracy. But they have a right to defend themselves when attacked. And that is what they've done. And that is what all of this ultimately boils down to. And of course, Starmer had to bring up their allies Russia as well, though, didn't he? That's another good reason to tell Israel to de-escalate them, because I'm very, very certain you don't want Russia involved here. They've already put in an appearance in the Red Sea with warships. It's a very interesting side to this story, because if Iran has any kind of military weaknesses themselves, it is that it lacks any real air force, some firepower in the way of jets and so on and so forth, which of course Russia do possess, and Israel possesses. Well, Russia, it seems, and the BBC again are reporting cooperation with Russia, with Iran, to go about fixing that little problem. Therefore, Russia could very well be involved already. Iran, it has to be said, has said in no uncertain terms it is done with Israel now, though. And let's just say I'll take their word for that long before I believe Netanyahu, especially as word is coming through at the time that I was recording this, that Israel might be gearing up to have another crack at Iran. And if they do that, they are crazy. But then Starmer truly jumped the shark, didn't he? He had the gall, the temerity to bring up sanctions against Iran as well. Gaza has been razed to the ground, north to fucking south. And you want to criminalise BDS against Israel, but Iran, oh no, sanctions now is absolutely the narrative. You absolute balloon of a man. But of course the sanctions narrative is coming from Israel too, brazen as they are, whinging like they do. Israel's Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, he's been very vocal over the last several days. He's tweeted out that, "This morning I sent letters to 32 countries and spoke with dozens of foreign ministers and leading figures in the world demanding that sanctions be imposed on the Iranian missile project. You should have been sanctioned into the floor for committing mass genocide over the last 6 months. I mean, the comparison here is just ridiculous. 6 months of atrocity in Gaza and nothing. Yet you want Iran sanctioned for retaliating against you when you attack them first? Well, why not? Whatever you seem to demand, the world seems to give you, doesn't it? The spoilt brat nation that is Israel." Katz also called for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be designated a terrorist organisation. Starmer aped the same response. Perhaps it's Katz writing his speeches here, in which case. But to the disappointment of both Starmer and Katz, I'm sure counter-terrorism legislation is designed to address terrorist groups, not the armed forces of entire states. And it's not me that's coming out with that, it's a former head of MI6 that has said as much. And then just as you figure that Starmer is finally finding something to speak honestly about, identifying the situation in Gaza as one driver of escalation, it isn't one driver, it is the driver. But if you thought he was finally going to criticise Israel, well, of course, you were thinking wrong. He ignores the 6 months of genocide all the way back to the Hamas attack on October 7th, where still to this day we don't know who actually died at Hamas's hands or Israel's own on that night, and still our politicians ignore that too. Starmer spoke of Israeli hostages still held by Hamas, but ignores why those hostages were taken in the first place, because Israel holds a great many more Palestinian hostages. He did, to his credit, mention the starvation Gaza faces, the famine as it now is. The thousands who have died are dying of starvation, but again draws short of saying Israel are to blame for that, just that diplomatic leverage is needed to get aid in. So sanctions for Iran over a retaliatory attack Israel instigated, but Israel killing tens of thousands and starving 1 million people more to death, diplomacy is needed, more talk. These people are way past out of time. Israel has refused to ever listen on this point. Starmer just cannot say the word Israel in line with an accusation. He just cannot do it. Go back over that speech again. Not once does he do that. He can shut his hole too when it comes to ceasefires as well, after the stunt he pulled when the SNP called for a meaningful immediate one of those back in February. The only honest thing he actually said in all of that was that diplomatic premises, i.e. embassies, must be protected. That was as much of a condemnation of Israel as he gave. But again, was not even prepared to mention Israel when he said it, though. Let's not upset those Israel lobby donors, I presume. This was one of the weakest, most inaccurate, gaslighting, misleading speeches I've ever heard from a British politician. Keir Starmer will be a nightmare Prime Minister, a truly shameless individual, utterly incapable of equal condemnation of atrocity, no matter who the perpetrators are, because if it's Israel, apparently it seems they will get a pass. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the country, in another show how little Starmer understands defence, aside from raiding the dressing up box to find some fatigues to act tough in now and again, he's been squealing about how he'd press the big red nuclear button and wants more nukes, as we seem set on electing another national leader more interested in being part of a global willy-waving contest than he does in peace. as you can find all the details of in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.